What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm back with another video. This time we'll be discussing the top 10 player rivalries in NBA history. Now before I get into this top 10 list, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, make sure to do so, and if you could like this video, I'd greatly appreciate it. So with that being said, let's get into the video. So first up at number 10, we have John Starks versus Reggie Miller, and this rivalry is one of the most heated rivalries of the 90s, and the Knicks and Pacers were some of the most brutal playoff series basketball you'll ever see. They met 5 times during the 90s, the Knicks winning 3 times, and the Pacers winning twice. And at this time, Reggie Miller was a perennial all-star, and John Starks was a hard-nosed defensive player who worked for everything he got. And with Reggie being one of the biggest trash talkers, and John Starks being one of the biggest hotheads, they were bound to clash. The biggest altercation they ever had was when John Starks headbutted Reggie Miller in the middle of a game after Reggie was talking trash and got in Starks' head like he usually did. Now besides that headbutt, some of the biggest plays in this rivalry include Reggie Miller having a 25-point fourth quarter after being provoked by John Starks as well as Spike Lee, and he had some big-time clutch buckets down the stretch that gave the Pacers a win in Madison Square Garden. Now also one of the big-time moments from this rivalry was when Reggie Miller once again was very clutch, having 8 points in 9 seconds, which is absolutely mind-boggling, especially for a playoff game. And the Pacers, thanks to Reggie Miller and some clutch free throws, would win this game 1 in New York. So this rivalry right here was one of the best player rivalries of the 90s and produced some of the most memorable playoff moments of that decade. That's why I rank it at the number 10 spot. Now looking ahead to number 9, we have Rondo versus Chris Paul. And these two guys right here are two of the biggest competitors in NBA history and have some of the highest basketball IQs to ever play the game. And their rivalry kind of goes under the radar, but where it begins is 2008 when Rondo was trying out for Team USA, and he was cut before making the top 30 players in favor of Chris Paul, Jason Kidd, as well as Darren Williams, and a host of other point guards. And Rondo being Rondo took that as a major slight, and he carried that anger into the next season. Now the first time CP3 and Rondo met the next year was in the Boston Garden, and this was a very hard-fought competitive game where actually Rondo and Chris Paul both got techs, but the real drama happens after the game, as both Rondo and Chris Paul got into an altercation. There was some shoving, there was some pushing, and Rondo was quoted as saying, "I've got a ring, and you're never going to win one." So definitely a major shot at Chris Paul, which at the time was true, and sadly to this day is also true, as Chris Paul is still ringless. Now over the next 5 to 7 years, there wouldn't be much from these two guys. There were always some subtle shots in the media, and you could tell there was an overall dislike, but there was no big blow-ups. Now that would all change in 2018, as Rondo was in the Lakers and Chris Paul was in the Rockets. And this was the opening night in the NBA, and a very infamous fight, as Rondo spit on Chris Paul in an act of rage. And because of this altercation, both players would miss 2 games, and the Chris Paul and Rondo rivalry was once again at the forefront of everyone's mind. And looking ahead to the 2021 playoffs, I'm hoping the Suns and Clippers meet in the second round, because I want to see this rivalry once again reignited. Now with the number 8 spot, we have LeBron James versus Steph Curry. And you could argue these two players are the best 2 players of the 2010s, and they're just 2 of the marquee players in NBA history. And during this decade, they met 4 times in the NBA Finals. And from 2011 to 2020, the NBA Finals featured one of these players, LeBron James or Steph Curry, or sometimes both. And they had some epic playoff battles. The 2015 Finals where Steph won his first ring, 2016 where LeBron had his 3-1 comeback, he trash-talked Klay Thompson, he trash-talked Steph Curry, and overall he basically punked Steph and the Warriors en route to a championship. Now Steph would come back the following 2 years very strong, winning the title in 2017 as well as 2018, and in the 2018 Finals, he was once again trash-talking LeBron James, and it was very evident there was some bad blood between these 2 bitter rivals. But overall, LeBron and Curry, they are very respectful, and from a general sense, I think they appreciate each other and how dedicated they are to the game of basketball. So because of those great battles in the finals, I rank this as the 8th best rivalry in NBA history. Now at the number 7 spot, we have SHAQ versus David Robinson. And this rivalry starts out in the early 90s, where SHAQ reportedly asked for an autograph from David Robinson and was quickly rebuffed and denied that autograph. So that moment right there was a pivotal moment in SHAQ's development, and from that point on, he hated one David Robinson. And it didn't help that SHAQ and Robinson were basically polar opposites. David Robinson was a very serious guy, a dedicated guy, and basically the ultimate pro who you'd want on your team. SHAQ, on the other hand, was an outgoing player, and basketball at some points was secondary to his overall social life. And really the only in-game battle these two had was the '94 All-Star Game, as David Robinson and company devised a plan to shut down SHAQ. and they actually did a very good job, as Shaq had a terrible shooting night going 2 for 12. And also during that 94 season, David Robinson would have an infamous 71-point game where he blatantly stat padded versus the LA Clippers, one of the worst teams in the league. And why he did that is because he wanted to beat Shaq in the scoring title, which he did by less than 20 points. And over the next decade, Shaq and Robinson will meet numerous times in the playoffs, but Shaq at this time was much better, and David Robinson was on the back end of his career, and there wasn't really many altercations. There was one incident where Shaq absolutely demolished David Robinson in the 96 All-Star game in San Antonio, which could have stemmed from the events in 94. And one thing that will blow your mind about this rivalry is that Shaq made everything up. David Robinson never denied him an autograph, and Shaq only said that because he needed more added motivation. So at the end of it all, this rivalry was built on a lie, but it still was very exciting and a very complex rivalry between these two players. Now at the number 6 spot, I have LeBron James versus Paul Pierce. And this rivalry right here is a very slept-on rivalry, as LeBron James, being the best player of the 2010s, used to have some big-time battles versus one Paul Pierce. So looking at LeBron and Pierce's rivalry, they met 5 times in the playoffs. In 08, they had an epic Game 7 battle where LeBron had 45 points and Pierce had 41. In 2010, Pierce's Celtics denied LeBron James a finals appearance versus Kobe. In 2011, LeBron got his revenge. In 2012, LeBron had the epic 45-point game in Boston, where he came back from a 3-2 deficit. And then in 2014, LeBron put the nail in the coffin versus the retirement home Brooklyn Nets. And believe it or not, LeBron James was actually quoted as saying that Paul Pierce was his biggest rival. And once again, I think this rivalry is one of the more forgotten rivalries in NBA history, as Paul Pierce went head-to-head versus LeBron James, one of the best players in NBA history. Now getting to the top 5, at number 5, I have Shaq versus Dwight Howard. And this rivalry is unlike any other rivalry, as these two players never met once in the playoffs, not one series, not even one game. But anyone who knows basketball knows these two players absolutely hate each other, and the hatred mainly comes from one Shaquille O'Neal. And as you guys know, Shaq, for some odd reason, hates young players and hates any superstar big man. And that hatred for big man really started with one Dwight Howard. And the real origin point of this rivalry comes when Dwight Howard stole Shaq's nickname, Superman. And I don't think it helped that Dwight was the best center in the NBA, playing on Shaq's former team, the Orlando Magic. And all throughout the 2010s, Shaq would diss Dwight at any chance he had.
Dwight Howard, who's a pick and roll player, you know, some people say he's the best, but me, being an old school big man, I'm gonna go with Robin Lopez and Andrew Bynum.
So that right there was kind of the quick summary of the Shaq versus Dwight rivalry. It was mainly coming from Shaq, as Dwight was getting bombarded with constant criticisms and critiques, and really, it was at no fault of his own. It was just Shaq being Shaq and hating young players. Now at the number 4 spot, we have Kobe versus Shaq. And once again, Shaq is on this list for the 3rd time. And the real origin of this rivalry is unknown. Kobe joined the Lakers in 96, and it wasn't until 98 that Shaq showed signs of being jealous. And all throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, Shaq would have little comments that just downplayed Kobe's impact. But it wasn't until 2001 that it really came out in the open that these two guys were not the best of friends, as Shaq in 2001 was out of shape and just not interested in basketball, and Kobe, being the exact opposite, resented Shaq for not taking basketball seriously. Also in 2003, Shaq would have the infamous line, "If I got hurt on company time, I'm gonna recover on company time." Something, once again, that rubbed Kobe the wrong way. And all of this drama would culminate in the 2004 season, as Shaq once again would diss Kobe, Kobe would diss Shaq, and would go back and forth, and there's a huge battle in the media between both players. And ultimately, the 04 Lakers would go down in flames, and Shaq the following offseason would be traded to the Heat, and Kobe would get his own team. And for a few years, there was bad blood, but eventually when Kobe won his championships, all was forgiven, and both players since then have made up, and the rivalry is water under the bridge. But still, looking back on it, I think it's a fascinating rivalry of two guys who are polar opposites, having to coexist and win championships. And that's why I rank their rivalry at the number 4 spot. Now looking ahead, number 3, we have Michael Jordan versus Isaiah Thomas. And this rivalry begins in the 85 All-Star game, where Isaiah Thomas allegedly froze Jordan out of his first ever All-Star game. And Jordan later on would catch wind of this plan, and he would forever hate one Isaiah Thomas. And when talking about this rivalry, a lot of people forget the next time these two met, Michael Jordan dropped 49 points, 15 boards, 5 assists, on 60% shooting in a blowout win versus the Pistons. And at this time, Jordan was becoming the biggest superstar in the league, and Isaiah Thomas resented him for that because Jordan was playing in his hometown of Chicago. So naturally there was some bad blood, but the '85 All-Star game did not help. And it wouldn't get any better in the following years, as these two guys and their teams met 4 straight times in the playoffs, Detroit winning 3 times and Chicago winning once. And those Pistons and Bulls series were legendary battles. They were physical, they were violent, and Detroit did anything they could to stop Michael Jordan. Now the big flashpoint in this rivalry that sparked a never-ending feud was in the '91 Eastern Conference Finals in Game 4 in Detroit. As in this game, Isaiah Thomas would walk off the court and not shake hands with Jordan, and to put it very simply, he showed no respect to the Bulls or to Michael Jordan by walking off that court. Now also one big part of this rivalry was the '92 Dream Team, as Jordan, being the best player on that team, allegedly had a bunch of say on who made the roster, and Isaiah Thomas unfortunately was not one of those players. And Isaiah not making the team has led to 25 years plus of conspiracy theories of who did Isaiah wrong. And even till this day, this feud and this rivalry continues to go on, and it looks like Jordan and Isaiah will never truly bury the hatchet. So that is why I put this rivalry at the number 3 spot. Now looking ahead to the number 2 spot, we have Wilt Chamberlain versus Bill Russell. And these two guys for the first 25 years in the NBA were the 2 greatest players in the league. And it's a very rare sight that you see 2 players of that stature meet so many times in the playoffs, as they met 8 times in the playoffs and played a total of 49 games, with Russell winning 7 times and Wilt only winning 1 time. And basically for the entire 1960s, these 2 players carried the NBA as the premier rivalry and the 2 premier players. And it's a very fascinating concept of how Russell and Chamberlain were basically exact opposites, but both great players and great winners. Russell obviously having 11 championships and Wilt having 2, Russell being seen as the selfless teammate who would do anything to win and was a dominant defensive player. Wilt Chamberlain, who was a great offensive player, a great scorer, and just a great all-around big, who sometimes valued off-the-court activities more than on-the-court activities. And together these 2 guys had some epic playoff battles. They were part of the Boston vs. LA rivalry, as well as the Boston vs. Philadelphia rivalry, and all in all these 2 guys are 2 of the pillars of the NBA, and the game would not be the same without the Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain rivalry. That's why I put them at the number 2 spot. Now looking at the number 1 spot for the best rivalry in NBA history, we have Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird, 2 players who saved the NBA and brought the Boston vs. LA rivalry back to the forefront of NBA fans. And when you look at this rivalry, the dynamics were basically polar opposite, but these 2 guys were the exact same players. You had Bird, who was the white guy on the East Coast, and Magic, who was the black guy on the West Coast, who played flashy, he was a showman, and Bird was a grinded-out player who would do anything to win. And on the surface, there were some very huge differences, but Magic and Bird, when it comes down to it, are basically the same player and had the same attitude towards the game of basketball. And the way they played the game, being selfless, putting winning first, really did revive the NBA and gain prominence for a lot of NBA players. And when you look back on 80s basketball, you think of Magic and Bird, their rivalry, also the Boston vs. LA finals, some epic showdowns, the '84 finals, as well as the '87 finals, and it really was the golden age of basketball, and it wouldn't have been the same without Magic and Bird, the greatest rivalry in NBA history. So there you have it. That's my top 10 player rivalries in NBA history. And as always, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.